Hi guys. So here we are. It's the 14th, or geez, the 18th of April. It's Saturday afternoon, and I'm putting together a little video here for you because um, my, we just yesterday had the grading policy released to us, and I wanted to share that with you. I know that a lot of you are obviously very concerned about your grades and how they will impact you and all those kinds of things. So I thought it only fair that I reach out to you and kind of give you an idea of not only what the grading policy is, but also, at least as how I understand it, and also what that means for us for the remainder of this school year, no matter however long that happens to be. So with that being said, I think let's start first with what they've decided in regards to quarter four. So as we as a staff understand it, they've decided that quarter four is going to be graded on a pass/incomplete scale. So you're either going to get a P for pass or an I for incomplete. There is no pass fail, but there is pass incomplete. Now I want to clarify what exactly that means. So what they've done is they've given us the opportunity to decide as a staff, and this will be true of all your courses, all your teachers. They've given us the opportunity to decide what it means to pass. It basically, we were asked to identify what we think were important standards that were yet to be covered, and our students need to show mastery of those standards in order to pass, if you will. Now, the idea is that if, in my mind, if you do all the modules, if you show, which most of you have done up to this point in the discussion boards and a couple of the things like Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail, a lot of you had very thoughtful responses, and I appreciate that. If you continue to expand on that work and you show thoughtful progress and real thought, you show that you're doing the work, to me, that's passing. You're showing progression. Now, what that means is that it's up to us. So in other classes, you're going to have to prove, I guess, to what that teacher believes to be mastery of the standards. Again, for me, it's about completing the work. It's about showing thoughtful responses. We're going to do more discussion board stuff in this second set of 5 modules, or this third set of 5 modules. We're going to show some, I'm going to continue with the discussion board stuff. I'm going to have us focus on some other things as well. So if you continue to be thoughtful, you continue to put in the work that you have up to this point, at least the overwhelming majority of you, then I don't foresee there being any issue with you passing. Now, if something should happen and you don't do, let's just pretend that you don't do what I've asked you to do and you don't meet the standard that I believe is necessary in order for you to show mastery of whatever standards we select, then what happens is you earn an incomplete. So it's not pass fail, it's pass incomplete. If you get the incomplete, then you do not receive credit for the second semester. So even if because there are no second semester exams, there will be no second semester exams, which for those of you that are experienced and know how the exam system works, you know that there's 3 grades for each semester, quarter 1 or 2, 3 or 4, let's say quarter 3, 4, and the exam, and those 3 are calculated together to give a final semester score. Well, with no exam, now you're down to just 2, and if, let's just pretend for a second that you got an A in quarter 3, but if something should happen and you fall off the grid and you don't do what you need to do and you're not timely and responsible with your work, then you get an I. Well, an A and an I is an I for the semester. So what does that mean? That means you do not receive second semester credit. The overwhelming majority of you, I think everybody in here, has earned first semester credit. So that's 1/2 of your required American history credit, pardon me. The second half is credit that you need to earn. And if you have an I for quarter 4, you don't earn that. Now here's where they've provided a little bit of loophole, if you will. For all those students that earn an I in our class, we as a staff are responsible for coming up with some kind of material that the students can work on next school year. So from August, that second, third week of August, when we always go back to school, to all the way until September 30th, if you have an incomplete for quarter 4 in any class, then you have until September 30th to show mastery and get a grade change from an I to a P. When that I becomes a P, then you get your second semester credit. All is good. If at the end of September 30th you have not done the necessary, then the I stands, and then there's no chance at attaining the second semester credit for school year 2019-2020, unless obviously you go and retake the course. If you're an American history student like you guys are, you would have to take second semester American history again. Now, I find this highly unlikely for the group of people that I'm talking to now, but it's very important that I share with you exactly what the policy is. Now, that's the policy as I understand it. I read it yesterday. I'm broadcasting it to you now. I've had a handful of discussions with colleagues. I believe very strongly that I'm correct in this. Some of this has been released to you already and you've looked over it. Certainly, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to add them in that stream down there below where I've posted this video. And I'm excited to ask. I have had office hours every single day over the course of this closure, and I've had a whopping 0 people show up. Now, that must mean that there are no questions. It's okay. But I'm here. So if you need to show up and ask questions in one of those settings, please be my guest. Now, what I do want to talk about, hopefully that's cleared a little bit of that up for you. What I do want to talk to you about is the how we're going to go about this next how many ever weeks. We know we know there's no question that we are out until May 1. That's Friday. That's 2 Fridays from yesterday. So you've got another 5 modules or 2 weeks of at-home material that needs to be completed online. What we don't know is if that will continue. If it does, we will continue to provide you modules in 2-week chunks until it is determined that the school year is done. It's that easy. Now, what I learned yesterday in regards to the grading policy and this emphasis on standards has unfortunately changed the material that you and I need to cover. So we focused really hard on civil rights. I thought I gave you some really interesting and compelling stuff. I love the graphic novel March. I think it's really, really cool. I've offered you some stuff on Dr. King, and also I thought the Malcolm Gladwell's pet podcast on Mrs. Buchanan brought out some really and Brown versus Board brought out some really intelligent discussion, and I tried to interject there along the way. So I appreciate your input there as well. Now, a lot of you, I shouldn't say a lot of you, about a third of you, actually watched the last video that I produced and gave your opinion on the kinds of things that you would like to cover. Now, here's the deal. Many of you talked about pop culture. You talked about Native Americans. Those are all incredibly valid and very interesting and compelling. My issue with that is our district has now afforded us a directive, and that is we have standards that we must address from the point where we left off, which you and I know was the end of World War II and in the atomic age, all the way till right where we would have ended our discussion, which would have been civil rights, women's rights, those kinds of things. Even depending on how time went, it would have been global terror. And we would have addressed a little bit of that, the history of terrorism against the United States, 9/11, why that happened, all that kind of stuff. Now, it's not fair for me to provide you with a bunch of work to make sure that all those standards are covered. However, I do want to pick out standards that I think I can create interesting work for. It's not going to be Native Americans. I'm very, very sorry for that. I feel like a hypocrite because I gave you that option. Now we get directive by the district that literally just come out yesterday. I told you that, goodness, almost 3 weeks ago now, and I was excited about giving you the chance to learn what you wanted to learn. Now, fortunately, the work we did the last 2 weeks is a civil rights, on the civil rights movement was all legitimate stuff. Now, what I want to do is I want to share with you. I'm recording this via Google Meet because I found that I can do presentations here. So what you should see now is you should see me on a little screen to the right. There I am. And just over here, right, is my computer screen. So if I show you what I was looking at earlier, this is the content standards for social studies. Now, this here, let's go to standard 28. Let's go up here to 28. You'll notice here it says, following World War II, the United States experienced a struggle for racial and gender equality and the extension of civil rights. Now, what we focused on was this portion here on African Americans. We focused obviously on Dr. King. There's a whole incredible movement besides Dr. King. Dr. King was nonviolent, an organizer of the nonviolent movement against oppression. What we know is there is a more militant faction of African American civil rights that it comes up in the early 1970s, known as the Black Power movement. Some of you have heard names like Black Panthers, and you're aware of things like the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, when the two fantastic track athletes raised their gloved fists in the air and were showing an instance of African American solidarity and unity and militancy. And now militancy doesn't mean picking up guns. It just means a more active, more aggressive, if you will, movement, obviously, other than Dr. King. Malcolm X is another incredibly important man as far as African American civil rights go, and is an incredibly compelling person who I would have loved to have gotten the opportunity to introduce you to. But again, I feel confident based on the work that we've done here so far. You get a really good view of what was going on in the 1960s in the United States, 1950s and 1960s, in regards to civil rights and the civil rights movement with Dr. King, John Lewis, and March, our March book. And so I feel confident there, on top of the work that we did regarding Jim Crow and all those kind of things earlier in the year. I feel very confident that we've done, I hate to say enough, because frankly, you could get a doctorate on the civil rights movement. But nevertheless, we have touched it. We have focused on it. So what does that mean? I think there are other standards that we must address. Brevity, unfortunately, is what we're facing here. So here obviously is standard 28. Now what I'd like to do is I would like to go back to standard 26. Now standard 26 is the Cold War. Now, for some of you that may think, oh God, here we go again. I don't, know what's going on or don't care what's going on. I can understand that feeling, especially as young people in 2020. It feels like ancient history. It's over. It doesn't matter. What I think it is of the utmost importance for you to understand as American history students is how the Cold War absolutely shaped post-World War II America. As a person who was born in 1976, a child of the 80s and early 90s, I was completely inundated with the Cold War. Some of you, and I've mentioned this a couple of times before, some of you don't really fear another country. When you fear something, when you fear someone or something, it's some kind of a terrorist act. You have a completely justified concern that you're going to go somewhere and somebody's going to commit a terrorist act. That, I know it doesn't frighten you to the point where you are shivering and don't go do those things, but in the back of your mind, if you think, boy, what can hurt me, right? I always know, God forbid, something could happen in a car wreck, or something could happen and I could hurt myself, or some bad individual could hurt me individually. But if I'm ever part, as a student, a young person in 2020, if I'm ever part of something awful, it's probably going to be some, big shooter or something terrible like that. Somebody who is doing committing some awful crime where they're randomly spraying bullets at a concert, or something that you are all too versed in, right? You've seen the terrible reports and all that kind of stuff. God forbid something at the school, right? Those are your fears, right? And they're completely justified and they're legitimate. I didn't have those concerns when I was your age. When I was in middle school and when I was in elementary school, late elementary school, fifth, sixth grade, and kind of understand what the world was about, I feared one thing and one thing only, and that was the Russians, right? It sounds silly, but it's very, very true. The Russians. Everything, all the movies on TV, if you've ever seen the Rocky movies, right? Rocky 4 is Rocky versus the Russian. And if you've seen movies like Red Dawn, right, it's a Russian invasion. And The Hunt for Red October, and everything was good guys American and bad guys Russian. And that is absolutely a product of the Cold War. So, the Cold War was suffocating in its presence during those years from 1945 to 1991. Absolutely suffocating. It was all encompassing. It was always around. And so for me to take a chunk of time like that, and even if it doesn't, sound interesting to you, I am obligated to make sure that we have at least some grasp on the Cold War. Now, my goal is to provide you with the kinds of activities that can allow you to maybe get a hold of some of that. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to focus on, if we look, and I know you're on the screen with me here, notice here this, it says a space race impelled the United States to increase spending on science education. I promise you that the space race of the late 1950s and 60s was one that is unparalleled in world history. It was a product of not only military importance, but also national momentum and pride and all those kind of things. And I, just to be honest with you, maybe I'm taking liberties here. I'm the teacher. I think it's super cool. I think I want to teach you about it. So we're going to focus at least on one module. We're going to focus on the space race in America. And I think I've got some interesting things to share with you there. So that should be fun. I also want to focus on the Korean War and the war in Vietnam. I think those are things that you've all heard of, but really are maybe fuzzy exactly how things went down, what all went on. So we're going to focus during this 2-week chunk on the space race, the war in Korea, and the war in Vietnam. And if you'll be so forgiving as to allow me the opportunity during one of these modules to tell you the story of my grandfather and his experience in Korea. So I would certainly appreciate your letting me do that, and I hope it's something that inspires you and really kind of gives you an idea of what was going on in Korea. So that's where we're headed. As I kind of come back here to full screen, that's where we're headed. That's what we're going to be getting into. And you might be cussing me under your breath right now as you watch this video, but it is what it is. We need to make sure we're showing mastery of those standards as we move on. Feel really good about a lot of the work that you did in Standard 28 and the American Civil Rights Movement. Now we're going to backtrack a little bit, do Standard 26, look at the space race, Korea, and Vietnam as it pertains to the Cold War. Okay, so watch this, be prepared. All is good. I hope everybody's healthy. I appreciate you all very much, and be well. Bye now.